Hello everybody. Today we want to talk about COVID-19 and have a look on per capita data rather than on absolute numbers. Only with this approach you can see which country is affected most by the virus. We will concentrate on the last 3 months and see what happened in Europe and the USA. Countries took a different approach in their efforts to contain the virus. Some were quicker and more radical in their countermeasurements, others were slow and maybe too relaxed. Some claiming they were not warned early enough. Who would have imagined in December that just 3 months later more than 1 billion people would be quarantined and that worldwide the social and cultural life would come to a standstill? Nobody, really? If that is true, why the National Center for Medical Intelligence, NVMI, sent already back in November 2019 a memo to Israel, NATO and the White House warning everybody from a possible threat of the coronavirus. On April 8th, the White House denied the existence of such a memo, but on April 18th, the Times of Israel reported that Israel received the memo and that US intelligence agencies were fully aware of the disease as early as the second week of November.
In this report, we will have a closer look on the situation in Europe, identifying the real hotspots, and in the second half of the report, we are going to compare Europe to the USA. To understand the figures in this report, you need to be aware that we are talking about political Europe with roughly 530 million citizens, and not the geographical Europe with more than 750 million. In comparison, the US has 328 million citizens, what means the absolute US figures have to be multiplied with the factor 1.6. Now let's look a few months back. Remember, on January 30, the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus outbreak a public health emergency. Even it was not yet declared a pandemic, most of the world were aware how serious the threat was and that it is time to act. And looking back, February was the crucial month to get the virus outbreak under control. But what happened in America?
At this point?
No, we're not at all, and we have it totally under control, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine.
The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
I think it's going to work out fine. I think when we get into April and the warmer weather, that has a very negative effect on that and that type of a virus.
We're 15 people in this massive country, and because of the fact that we went early, we could have had a lot more than that. We're doing great. Our country is doing so great.
Later, health experts said that February was the most important month. The virus spread through the world, but numbers were still low, and if countries would have started early February with rigorous testing, identifying clusters, and isolate the infected persons, not just thousands of lives would be saved, but also our economy would not face today the biggest recessions of this millennium. Still, end of February, the world saw COVID-19 mainly as an Asian problem. But seeing what happened in Italy, it became slowly clear that the whole world is in risk. End of February, beginning of March, China is still on the top of the list, but that is going to change very quick. Then March came, and the situation really got bad for Europe. On March 15th, nearly 6 weeks after declaring COVID-19 a global public health emergency, the WHO finally declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. Many people ask themselves if the WHO did not hesitate too long. Later, the head of the WHO said, "We have rung the alarm bell loud and clear." Okay, when the risk was there and everything was so clear, why then waiting for 6 weeks? Hoping that political leadership understands the importance of the warning? Was it not clear that there are politicians out there who will not understand, politicians who are way too self-possessed and ignorant to understand that lives are at stake? March 13th, China moved to place 9 and except South Korea and Iran, only European countries can be found in the list. South Korea, what is now in place 3 with a nearly 3 times higher infection rate than China, looked bad at this time. A month later, the world could see that it is possible to beat the virus. China, South Korea, and also Taiwan managed it, and none of them is today in the top list. And if the US president would not have slept and played the risk down, the situation in America would look today completely different. Experts claimed if the US would have reacted just 2 weeks earlier, 80% of their lives could have been saved.
But now let's have a look what happened in the last 5 weeks. March 18th was a crucial date for most of the countries. Around this day, nearly everywhere the number of infections started to climb steep. First you have a look on Europe, where the virus started early in March to show that it will have a bigger impact on Europe than on Asia. Within a few days, Italy's number doubled. Switzerland is now on second place, closely followed by Spain and Norway. Interesting are also the numbers of Austria. 30% more infection than Germany, and it seems that it might become a new hotspot. There are 3 European countries not mentioned: Iceland, Luxembourg and Liechtenstein, who would be all in the 700s, but the absolute numbers were still very low and therefore we omit them for now. Already in the next chart they will appear then. Mid of March, Italy was all over the media referred to as the hardest hit European country, if not the world. But was it true? Sure, the absolute numbers were terrible and outrun all other countries, but if you look on the per capita figures, the reality looks different. Here on this graph you can clearly see that already on March 18th, Italy was on place 3, and already 2 days later on place 4. Not Italy, but Iceland and Luxembourg were the hardest hit countries, and both are still today. Spain is another country what got, due to the high absolute numbers, a lot of media attention. But what's about Switzerland and Belgium? Switzerland is since March 24th in a worse position than Italy, direct after Spain but before Belgium and Italy. Situation April 18th. Luxembourg place 1, close to 0.6% infection rate, followed by Iceland with 0.5, but Iceland shows a clear flattening line and is clearly over the peak. Followed by Spain and Belgium, where not much improvement can be seen, and then on place 5 and 6 Switzerland and Ireland with about 0.33%. And only then on place 7 appears Italy with 0.3%. Worth to mention is that while Switzerland's curve is flattening, Ireland's is still on the rise. Here should be pointed out that strict movement control measures, massive testing and isolating infection clusters not just helped Iceland to get COVID-19 under control, but also Liechtenstein and Austria seems to have the worst behind them. Both were looking quite bad for a while. Now Austria with 0.16% does not even appear anymore in this list, and it holds now place 14 in Europe. Maybe at this time we should have a brief look on Asia. Malaysia is a country what was early hit and was under huge risk, but Malaysia introduced one of the most stringent movement control orders in Southeast Asia, and it did it early and with success. Today Malaysia is worldwide on place 43 with less than 170 infections per million and the lowest death rate in Asia with 3 deaths per million. Considering that we are talking about a country of 32 million people in the heart of Asia, we can just say, until now we discussed only the infection and not the mortality rate. Let's see if we see here something similar. In the chart before, Belgium looked real scary, holding the 5th place in Europe. Scary not only because of its sharp rise, but also because you cannot see that the curve starts to flatten. And now, mortality-wise, it's on 1st place. But it's important to understand that all statistics are only as reliable as the validity of the reported data. And Belgium was one of the few countries in the world who reported from the very beginning also the death happening outside of hospitals. And according to the Belgian government, more than 50% of the reported deaths are happening in home and not in hospitals. On this graph you can clearly see that over the last few weeks the countries Italy and Spain are on the very top. Till 4th of April, Italy was the country with the highest mortality, but then Spain took the 1st place. Still we believe we should worry about Belgium, who seems to outrun both, and actually nobody talks much about them. Belgium also tests only about half as much as countries like Germany, Italy or Switzerland, and considerably less than Spain or France. Considering that Brussels is the place where the European Parliament meets, I would say it deserves to be observed closely, and I really wonder how it escaped media attention. Of course also UK is a country which should be watched closely. UK was a country what implemented social distancing way too late, and the result can be seen clearly. While in most of the countries the curve starts to flatten, in the UK it's still rising. Furthermore, the number of tests concluded are 3 times lower than for example in Ireland, which showed the last days also worrisome increase on infections, but still stays with 82 deaths per million below the European average, but double as high as the mortality rate in Austria, place 19, or Germany, place 20. Both countries have a mortality rate about 1/8 of Spain. Also, Sweden should be followed closely, as it went a complete different path than the rest of Europe and did not went into a lockdown. If their strategy works out, or if the Swedish people will have to pay the price for it, we should see soon. Now let's compare Europe to the USA. Looking just on the infections, you can see that a month ago the US had approximately 9 times less reported cases. USA 10,000 infections compared to Europe's 90,000. As we work in per capita data, and Europe has 1.6 times more people, you need to correct the US figure from 10 to 16,000. Ergo, the US had only 20% of Europe's infections. Already on April 8th, both USA and Europe were head on head. And now on 21st, less than 2 weeks have passed, the USA records about 2,500 infections per 1 million citizen, and with this figure it is 20% ahead of Europe, which reported on this day 2,000. The situation looks even worse if we look on the state New York, who has a rocking number of 13,100 cases per 1 million citizen, what is about 4 times higher than Italy and 3 times higher than Spain. New Jersey is with 10,000, not far behind, especially considering that it tested 40% less than the state New York. The real figures might be the same or even higher than New York. Similar, it looks in Massachusetts and Louisiana, where the numbers are clear above 6,000, and these countries tested even less. Comparing Europe and US hotspots, we will find that the 5 most hit countries in the US show that the number of infections is between 50 and 120% higher than in their European counterparts. Here testing cannot be blamed, as both sides, the US and Europe, have similar test rates in their hotspots. The US middle value is 25,600 and the European middle value is 27,100 per million citizens. If you look on Europe and USA in total, then again it looks a bit different. The US middle testing value is 13,000, while the European value is 23,000. Let's compare the mortality rates between the USA and Europe. Here it does not look that bad for the US, but please keep in mind that mortality rates always rise with a time delay to hospitalize people, and the US is roughly 14 days behind Europe. Regarding mortality, New York is worldwide number 1, with 1,004 deaths per million, outrun just by San Marino with 1,179 cases. But San Marino is a microstate surrounded by Italy, and the absolute number of deaths is 62, compared to 20,000 in New York. In San Marino, the last 10 days, the number of deaths rose just 10%, while in New York it was 90%. Therefore, it's rather safe to say New York is number 1. The US started with testing, and in some but not all countries with movement restrictions, weeks later than Europe. And as we saw before, testing volumes are still lagging behind. The chances are high that the virus spread in the US for many weeks undetected and infected millions. Still today there are countries in the US where social distancing or wearing a mask in public is not obligatory. While Europe might have already passed the peak of the outbreak, the US will still have weeks to go. When it comes to mortality and death, do you still remember Trump's words?
It's going to go away. It's going to go away. I was watching Scott this morning, and he was saying within 2 months. But, you know, in the meantime, we want to lose as few people as possible. So important. And what is the number as of this morning? Is it 32? You can tell me. Is it 32 deaths? See, around that. I mean, think of it. The United States, because of what I did and what the administration did with China, we have 32 deaths at this point. Other countries that are smaller countries have many, many deaths. 32 is a lot. 32 is too many.
We would say 45,000 deaths because he did not do his job. Mr. President, you failed. But it is not just the USA. Something similar happens in Brazil, and you can also find an example in Europe where Sweden goes a complete different path than the rest of the countries. It decided to ignore all warnings and keep the country open. One thing is sure, whatever governments in this crisis decide, it will provide food for the opposition to attack. If they close down the country, they will be blamed for destroying the economy, and if they don't, then they will be blamed that lives were lost. Let's compare Sweden to a similar sized country, Austria, and please have in mind that Austria had clear disadvantages. When the crisis started, Austria was in the middle of the winter tourist season, with, according to the World Bank, 5 times more tourists than Sweden. Furthermore, Austria is neighboring to Bavaria, where the first European cases occurred, and to Italy, what was early March the absolute hotspot. In spite of that, the situation looks as follows. On the graphic you can see that till mid of March, when Austria implemented the lockdown, the situation was similar. Austria was even slightly in a worse position than Sweden. But already 2 weeks later you can see that the lockdown had effects and Austria figures started to decline. A clear flattening of the curve can be seen. Different in Sweden, where the numbers are still rising, and in the 3rd week of April, Sweden had 3 times more infection than Austria. Mortality-wise, the timeline is similar, but the figures are worse. Sweden had a 5 times higher mortality rate. As we are confronted with a complete new virus, it is good that countries follow different approaches in fighting the pandemic. It allows us to learn. And it is comforting to know that there are countries who were successful in their fights. Everybody should decide on its own if he or she is okay with the way the elected government handled the situation. Currently, one of the hottest topics is the pro and con of the lockdowns. And no doubt at all, a lockdown will always have a negative impact on the economy and in consequence on the life quality of its citizens. The question is, what is the higher good, humanity or economy? If there is a duty to render assistance to people in distress, can we put economy above humanity? Should it then not be the highest priority of all governments to protect the lives of the citizens, even if it means that the life quality of the masses will shrink? Maybe we should ask us a simple question. How many deaths we consider as acceptable in order to keep our high living standard? 100, 1,000, 10,000 or 100,000? And what is if you are one of them, or a family member, or a friend? Thank you guys for listening, and please use the comment section to discuss the questions, or just let us know your thoughts to the topic. Of course, as always, if you like the video, please hit the like button, and sharing is highly appreciated. Stay healthy and tuned.